Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Ask Rob and Rob show. The show that you get your questions in and we give you our answers. Well, this week actually we've only got one question, but it's a biggie, so we're going to cover that off. But before we do, let's remind you once more how you can get your questions in.
Yep, just give us a call, 013 808 0035. That's 013 808 0035. If you want to be a bit flash and do it over the internet instead, then go to propertyhub.net/ask. Either way, send in your question and we'll be sure to give you an answer. So while you ponder what you want to ask, let's hear what Becky has to ask.
Hi Rob and Rob, it's Becky here. Thanks so much for such a wonderful podcast. I listen every single week. Just wondering, now Boris Johnson's in power as Prime Minister, he's made some suggestions he's going to change stamp duty, and I wondered how that's going to impact investors. If you could let me know your thoughts, I'd be really grateful. Thanks.
Well, Rob, we said it was one question, but this is a biggie because lots of people have been asking us about Boris in all different ways. So we can cover it off in one Ask episode so we can answer Becky's question, but talk about Boris in general.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with what he said specifically about property before talking about what he might mean in general. He said some interesting things on the campaign trail around stamp duty in particular. The most eye-catching was that he has mentioned that he wants to move the threshold at which stamp duty starts to £500,000, which is a huge step up from its current level of £125,000. So if that happens, that is going to make an enormous difference. He's also talking about reducing the top rate of stamp duty from 12% down to 7%. So for most of us as investors, that's not going to make any difference because that top rate only kicks in on homes worth more than £1.5 million. Most of us are not going to be buying buy-to-lets for that amount of money. But it could make some big changes to the market, especially in prime London, get that market going again, which could then ripple out and affect the kind of areas that we are investing in. So that's interesting as well. Something else that he said to be considering is changing stamp duty so the seller pays it rather than the buyer. Now, that's not something he's actually announced at any point, but it's just something that apparently is being considered and would again make a big difference to the market if it did happen. Unfortunately, something that's not been suggested at any point is removing the 3% surcharge for buy-to-let investors. That probably would be too unpopular with the wider electorate to take away, so it looks like that's going to be in place. Now, it's worth bearing in mind, Rob, that what politicians say in a leadership contest and what they do once elected are not necessarily that correlated. But I can see some of this happening because, as we know, transaction volumes are way down. London and the southeast in particular is struggling, and these measures could get things moving again.
Yes, previously on the podcast, we've talked about stamp duty and we didn't say it's nailed on, but we've suggested that changes could happen after Brexit to stimulate the market because it will need it. People will be nervous after Brexit, whatever form or shape that takes. But what's interesting here is that this isn't just a change to stamp duty, it's practically an overhaul. There's so many changes listed off here, but you are right to say that what is promised or talked about by a politician and what is delivered can often be two different things. I think most likely of the changes to happen is probably going to be the stamp duty threshold rising to £500,000. That would really stimulate the market in most places in the country. Doesn't affect London too much, but that will make a huge difference. You know, the thought of moving home and then having to lump out thousands of pounds on top just in stamp duty is off-putting to many people. So that I wouldn't be shocked, and I don't think it's that radical. Reducing the stamp duty at the top end is a little bit more radical because normally there isn't a lot of sympathy for wealthy people. And why can't they pay the 12%? Well, it's because large parts of the London market now is over that price point. And a family home in Zone 1, Zone 2 of London often is north of 1.5 million. So having to lump out six figures just to move house means the market has really ground to a halt. So again, I wouldn't be shocked to see that. The most radical, though, is the sellers paying stamp duty into the buyers. Rob, I know you've championed this one in the past, and this would make such a huge difference to the market. And where the other two would really help it, I think this would turbocharge it. I think this would light up the property market and turbocharges into the next boom.
It could, and I'm not convinced it'll happen this time around because the margins he's operated with are so slim and it will annoy a lot of people if it does happen. So maybe not this time around, but interesting that it still seems to be under consideration. So that's what we know he said about property so far. But Rob, what about Boris in general? Can property investors and indeed the country at large be happy that we have him as Prime Minister now?
Well, love him or loathe him, he's going to make a difference. His track record, and already he's started to demonstrate, is one of action. He wants to put big policies in place. Now, whether you agree with these big statements, policies, or vision that he has for the country or not, it will impact us. Now, I think typically Boris plays up to a stereotype of politician that may seem very good in the short term, but we can look back in the future and go, was he great after all? You know, now time's played out when we reflect on what he did and didn't do. Was he a good politician? Because I think a lot of the things Boris will do is to stimulate the economy in a big way to make sure that we are seen to be successful after Brexit. Again, at this point of recording, we don't know what Brexit we're getting. But whichever Brexit we're getting, economically, it's going to be a bit challenging to begin with. So Boris will want to stimulate the economy and get money flowing through our system. So I suspect he'll make decisions that will stimulate the economy, like some of these stamp duty changes, and more, to get us all feeling good and confident. But what that will do is create a bubble. And that bubble will feel great for a few years. And if he gets it done in time, he'll do very well at the next election. But what happens after a boom? Well, a bust. But by then, he might not care. He'll have some sort of a legacy, and he would have got to be in power for a while. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'll leave that up to you to decide. But are those practices exclusive to Boris? No. We've seen different prime ministers do it time after time. Because rightly or wrongly, we don't give politicians a lot of time. If they don't get quick results, they don't stay in power for long.
So there you go. Time will tell what Boris is going to mean for property investors. But those are our thoughts at the moment. And thank you, Becky, for asking that question. Do send in questions of your own. 013 808 0035 is the number. And after you've done that, sit tight till Thursday when the Property Podcast is back for another episode. So we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.